Hi, everyone. Welcome back to day 2 of Newkind. If you're feeling anything like I am, I'm already a little bit disappointed that we're halfway through the event and we have to say goodbye soon. We already had some conversations with some of you and everyone's like, oh, I don't want to leave Newkind. I want to stay at Newkind. I'm like, yeah, that's the whole point. We're trying to create a world that is Newkind so we can stay in that world always. But for now, we've got to have these brief moments of relief and connection so that we can go out there and carry that memory of what it felt like to be here, and then let that desire to experience that memory again drive us to do the work we need to do. So thank you for coming back. I'm really excited about the day we have ahead. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge and remind us all that we are meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung, and the Bunurong Boonwurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nations. This land always was, always will be Aboriginal land. And as I said yesterday in my opening keynote, there can be no justice built upon injustice. And the first injustice we have to address is that we have to re-establish and reinstate First Nation sovereignty on these lands. We have an incredible lineup of speakers and panelists today, and I'm really excited to get on the way. I'd like to, at this point, also thank RMIT for hosting us. I'd like to thank Jobs Bank for being our major sponsor and our event partners, the Institute of Nonviolence, One Red Step, and Just Gold Digital Agency. Without any further ado, because you're going to see me on the panel very shortly and I'll speak my mind openly there, I'd like to hand over to Sophie to introduce our morning opening keynote, Dr. Sovaida Ewing.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to welcome Sovaida Ewing to join the Teams call. If the tech can please invite her to join, I'm going to just give her an introduction to you all. Sovaida Ewing is a prolific author and speaker. She's an international lawyer with 18 years of experience in private and government practice, and the founding director of the Centre for Peace and Global Governance, which is a virtual think tank and online forum that pools and proposes principled solutions to pressing global challenges through publications, podcasts, lectures, online courses, workshops, and targeted consulting. She has written 5 books in the areas of peace, collective security, and global governance. And she also hosts a live monthly video cast entitled Reimagining Our World on her CPGG, which is the Centre for Peace and Global Governance, YouTube channel, which is dedicated to creating a vision of the world we want and infusing hope that we can make the choices necessary to attain it. Ms. Ewing has lived and worked in 4 continents and speaks 4 languages, and she's tuning in with us all the way from the US this morning. Can we please give her a huge round of applause and welcome her onto the screen?
Welcome to this presentation. It's time to bring order to our global home. There comes a time in all of our lives when we have to stop and take stock of where we are, make sure that we're heading in the right direction, that we're going to arrive at the destination we want to be at. As a global community, we're long overdue for this stock taking. It's time for a clear-eyed assessment of the choices we've made that have got us to where we are today. And we have to ask ourselves honestly, do we like where we are? And if not, what can we do differently moving forward? What choices can we make? Because we are at choice in order to create a new reality or a new kind or new way of being. This requires creating a vision of where we want to end up and then determining the steps that we need to take to bridge the gap between here and there. So where are we? The world is, as you all know, being buffeted by crises on every side. Humanity is actually hurtling in the direction of a cliff top at accelerating speeds. We've got to change course, and we've got to change it fast if we're to survive. Now, many of our crises are both global and existential. In other words, the very survival of the human race depends upon us solving them. As I see it, the main ones are climate change with its attendant problems of food insecurity, lack of food, lack of clean water, lack of enough energy for all nations and peoples. The second is the threat of a nuclear war resulting from either deliberate or accidental use of proliferated nuclear weapons. And the third is devastating conflicts like the ones we've seen in Ukraine that we see today, that we've seen in Syria, Yemen, Tigray, and so on. There's a long list of them. So I believe we're at a fork in the road as a humanity. Our options are to either unify or self-destruct. And this is our journey today, to see how we can bring order to this global home. Before we think about the concrete behavioral steps, we have to first figure out what steps we need to take in terms of shifting the way we think, or mindset shifts. The first mindset shift is to recognize that humanity as a whole has been going through various developmental stages of growth. That's what our history has been about. And this evolution is marked by ever-widening circles of integration, going from the family to the clan to the city-state to the nation, and then we got stuck there. The next inevitable step is for us to owe our primary allegiance to the human race as a whole. But buckle up, because humanity at the moment is navigating a very turbulent adolescence, and we seem to have kind of gotten stuck in this adolescent phase. We know that just as individuals can get retarded in their growth, so too our societies can. And if we're not careful, if we stay in the stage we're in, this turbulent adolescence, too long, we're going to start exhibiting signs of retardation. And I would argue that, in fact, we're already seeing those signs in the global crises that we're witnessing. So the first step is to actually jettison the old stuff that isn't working. So there are two steps that need to be taken as we take the step towards maturation. The first is to figure out what isn't working, throw it out, and then to figure out what will work and adopt new ways of being. For as Einstein said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. We've got to grow up and recognize that institutions, laws, and policies are there to serve the well-being of humanity and not for us to be sacrificed in order to maintain them. And in a world where there is an immutable law of change and decay, our institutions and processes are not immune from them. So another way of saying this is that institutions, laws, policies, and processes that were fit for purpose when we were children, when humanity was in its kind of childhood stages, they are no longer fit for purpose today. And we need to create new tools and capabilities in the form of new institutions that reflect this ever-widening circle of unity. So, the second mindset shift is to recognize that our world has become a single organism. We are interconnected and interdependent in an unprecedented fashion. We've basically become one unit, like the one organism, like the human body. Now, one of the results of becoming a single body is that we become prone to systemic risks. So just like the body is prone to cancer, which once it attacks one part of the body can then get into all the parts of the body, so too what crises that befall one nation or one region of the world in today's interdependent world start to affect all parts of the world. If we were in any doubt that this was true, we just have to look at the conflict in Ukraine. Here was a regional conflict, a war between two nations that has triggered a global energy crisis, a global food crisis, a global economic crisis, the possibility of a nuclear conflict, which would be catastrophic for the whole world, even if it were limited geographically and in time. In fact, experts say it would lead to 2 billion people starving, and could also lead to the unleashing of a third world war. So this is proof positive that we are truly interconnected in a single organism. So if we said we were at a fork in the road, and if we are to choose unity over self-destruction, where do we begin? Well, we begin by recognizing that there is such a thing as the law of oneness. You know, just as there are physical laws that govern our physical reality, like the law of gravity, so too there are laws that govern our social reality, and if you like, some people would say our spiritual reality. that law that governs us, whether we like to acknowledge it or not, and we can always stick our heads in the sand, we have free will choice and say, I don't believe such a thing exists, and we're entitled to it. But I believe the law of oneness is real and it operates on us. And we ignore it at our peril. So just as one could ignore the law of gravity and say, I choose not to believe it exists, if we tried to build an airplane not taking it into account, we would be very foolish because it wouldn't succeed and probably cause a lot of damage. Likewise, the fact that we have blindly ignored this law of oneness in building our economic, environmental, political, social, and religious institutions, that fact that we've blindly ignored it means that it has led to catastrophic failure. So when we now look at the disintegration of all our world institutions and processes, we should make that connection that, oh, okay, lesson learned. As we go about building something new, we need to found it on the basis of the law of oneness. Okay, so we've talked about the maturation analysis, the fact that humanity is going through turbulent adolescence, standing at the threshold of maturity, and we've talked about the law of oneness. So we now recognize that what the world needs more than anything else, in a world that is so interconnected, in a world in which our global challenges are collective in nature and existential, and therefore demand collective collective action, we need to start building the sorts of mechanisms, the international institutions that are fit for purpose to meet the needs and challenges of this maturing humanity. Institutions that are grounded on the principle of oneness or the law of oneness, and that have as their operating, if you like, instructions, collaboration, cooperation, and consultation. A good example of this area where this need is really apparent is climate change. And we saw this just this weekend with the closing of the COP27 conference in Egypt. Honestly, it beggars belief that after 27 years of annual conferences of the parties, we are still relying on a system of voluntary pledges on the part of nations to arrest one of the most intractable challenges of our time, which is to keep global warming from going beyond 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. One of the world's renowned climate scientists who's at Stanford says that it's now clear and it's inevitable that the world is going to surpass the 1.5 degrees. And it's going to lead to catastrophe. And he recognizes this paralysis that he talks about. There was just an article today about in which he was quoted. He talks about the paralysis that political leaders have. We seem to have, this seems to become our habit. We see disasters looming, and then we sit by and we ineffectually wring our hands and gnash our teeth while watching the crisis unfold. You remember we did this with Ukraine. We predicted, based on intelligence, that a war was coming. Day after day, we were all glued to our TV sets, knowing that a war was going to start. We watched it unfold. We watched the tanks roll in, and yet nobody did anything to stop this war from happening. It's been the same with climate change for years and years now. We see it. We talk about all the disasters that will happen in droughts and floods and wildfires and all of the disasters, the heating occurs, and yet we sit by ineffectually. Our plight is best summed up by an analogy offered by a Singaporean diplomat and academic called Kishore Mahbubani. He likens humanity, the 198 nations, to a ship. He said, we used to be 198 boats bobbing on the sea of international life, but now we've become a ship with 198 cabins. However, there is no captain or crew for the ship as a whole. Each cabin is regulated internally. But if turbulent storms were to hit, we wouldn't know what to do with the ship. And climate change, the war in Ukraine, the economic recession, these are all those turbulent storms. So we've talked about the mindsets. The question is, what behavioral shifts can we engage in that will make a difference in creating a new kind of world? So I want to suggest that it's time to build a viable system of global governance. And I want to take to heart this quote by Buckminster Fuller, who was an American theoretician and a philosopher. He said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." So today I want to share with you two ideas I have for radically reconceptualizing our understanding of society that is founded on this idea of oneness, the principle of oneness, which means recognizing that we need to be acting on the understanding that our interests as nations are fused, rather than trying this futile exercise of constantly maintaining an equilibrium of competing interests. The first thing I'd like to propose is that we build a global supranational agency, supranational, not international between nations, but something that sits above nations, that has the sole authority to manage all sources of energy in order to ensure their equitable distribution to all nations at reasonable prices. Doing this would go a long way to solving a triad of global challenges, including climate change, because this institution could would have the power to regulate the kinds of energy that each nation uses and move us, therefore, faster from burning fossil fuels to clean energy. It would also solve the second global challenge of equitable access to energy on the part of all nations and peoples, and the third global challenge of nuclear proliferation, because it would control and manage the production of nuclear material for the purpose of making electricity and energy, and therefore no nation would be able to set up a parallel illicit system of military nuclear weapons. This institution would have democratic legitimacy because it would be elected in a two-step process, first by the members of all the world's parliaments that would elect two individuals, and then all the individuals from 198 nations elected, two per nation, would then get together and from amongst themselves would elect 19 people to serve for a period of a few years. It would act autonomously in the collective interest of humanity and would be independently funded from a levy to be imposed on the revenues from the production of energy, so that the nations who contribute more money can't say, well, we have a bigger say. There would be no national contributions. It would be completely independent. Decisions would be made on a majority basis after full consultation. This was another problem at the COP meetings that's been highlighted in all the articles we're reading, that everything has to be done by consensus. So if you can't get all the nations to get on board with something, you're not going to get agreement. And so the agreements that are coming out of these conferences like COP27 are the lowest common denominator. We weren't even able to agree that we need to keep global warming down to 1.5 degrees Celsius. I mean, that target that was set in 2015, no extra steps were taken this meeting to make sure that it was met. And finally, we need to, this institution needs to have the power to enforce its rulings. Now, there's a whole model. This has been done before. The European Coal and Steel Community is such a model. If you want to learn more about it, the last slide will direct you to a couple of books that you can pick up, in which I've laid down in detail what this is. The second thing that I want to propose we do is to create a global system of collective security that in short requires that the nations of the world gather together, create a commission that determines the amount of arms that each nation needs to have to maintain order within its borders. Anything in excess of that needs to be destroyed under international supervision, and all nuclear weapons need to be destroyed in a phased reduction. The nations must then agree that if one nation arises to disturb the peace of the world, think Syria, think the Ukraine conflict, all the nations rise against this using an international standing force that will have been created using troops and equipment contributed by all the nations. So all nations have a stake in it. action will be taken on the basis of predetermined rules that all the nations have agreed to, based on globally accepted laws rather than fuzzy policies, which is the way we proceed these days on a case-by-case basis. And I know some of you may remember that President Zelensky recommended when he spoke to Congress a few months ago that the world create a U-24, a United for Peace standing force that could be pulled together in 24 hours. As soon as the peace is breached in any part of the world, could rush to that part of the world and stem the problem before it turns everything on its head. I want to end with one final idea. One of the problems we have is that the leaders we have are ineffectual and really unfit to meet the needs and challenges of our world today, as we have seen again at the COP27. So we need to change two things. First of all, the way we conceive of power and authority. And I would propose very briefly that instead of thinking of power and authority as things that dominate and control us and our resources, that actually what power and authority is, the purpose of it is to create those conditions in which we can all actualize our potential. That means we need a new kind of leader, and I want to propose a definition for what that leader is. A leader is someone who changes thoughts, beliefs, and actions for the better. It's a really simple definition. The role of a new kind of leader is to encourage, guide, empower, and enable, and to be in service. Leaders are just there to fulfill functions as opposed to gain a status in life. They're there to serve us. They need to be able to take a long-term view as opposed to be reactive to the crisis of the moment and think in short term. They also need to be able to take people where they need to go, even if they don't want to go there. And goodness knows we need that with climate change, right? The qualities of the new leaders need to include honesty, freedom from prejudice, courage, freedom from corruption, basic competence, which is hard to come by, humility, wisdom, justice, choosing means that are as worthy as the ends, compassion, seeking diversity of input, and transparency. Those are three big ideas that I wanted to share with you today. So the two global supranational institutions and a new way of conceptualizing power and authority and a new kind of leadership that we need to train ourselves to elect. I want to end with this quote from Robert Schuman, who was one of the founders of the European Coal and Steel Community. He was a foreign minister of France. He said, "World peace cannot be safeguarded without the making of creative efforts proportionate to the dangers which threaten it." It is time, folks, for creativity and courage. It's time to think, not just think outside the box, but get rid of the box altogether. Because we need to reconceptualize our society in radical terms. If you're interested in a further unpacking of all these ideas, I know I tried to shoehorn a lot into 22 minutes. You can look for these books on Amazon, Building a World Federation, The Key to Resolving Our Global Crises. These books are available both digitally and in soft copy. And the other is The Alchemy of Peace, 6 Essential Shifts in Mindsets and Habits to Achieve World Peace. I'm grateful to you all for your attention. I'm grateful to Newkind for this very gracious invitation for me to be with you today. And I look forward to engaging in conversation with you. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Sovaida. If you're still hearing this, that was absolutely incredible. Brilliant way to start the day, and also to frame this idea of unity and oneness that we've already been talking about as a theme throughout the conference. And of course, every issue of justice that we're discussing at Newkind is that precursor to achieving unity. So thank you so much for setting that broader goal into our minds. It'll be feeding in really well to the next panels of the day on systemic racism, climate justice. So thank you. And it's an honor to have you with us. Really appreciate it. Another round of applause, please.